and welcome to this Critical Minerals for the Energy Transition reporting workshop hosted by the Africa-China Reporting Project based at the Wits Center for Journalism. Welcome all to the University of the Witwatersrand. Welcome to Johannesburg to our visiting delegates. Welcome to South Africa. Thank you. Let's give yourselves a round of applause. All right, so I'm Bongiwe Tutu. I'm the project coordinator for the Africa-China Reporting Project. And I'm joined with my colleague, Tom Baxter from the China Dialogue Trust. It's always such a great pleasure to be working with China Dialogue Trust. We've engaged and collaborated in a number of initiatives, training and supporting journalists in Africa and China. It's always such a great privilege. And for the first time, we host something in person. So we're no longer avatars seeing each other through the screen. We are now both in the same venue. So it's such a great pleasure. Thank you so much, Tom. Thank you for the work that you continue to do imparting on journalists within the continent and the rest of the world. So I'm just going to speak briefly about the Africa-China Reporting Project, and then I'll allow Tom to speak more specifically about the workshop and the convenings that we're going to be having throughout the next two days. So the Africa-China Reporting Project, as I've mentioned, is based at the Wits Center for Journalism. The project was established in 2009, and it was under the premise and the objective and the belief that public-oriented contextual journalism would broaden public perceptions and understandings of China-Africa relations, recognizing the need for the mutual understanding of Africa-China in two ways, namely through investigative news reporting that is of quality content, and as well as journalists' capacity building, which is undertaken through training workshops as well as resources. So we're very privileged to be here today and to have you with us, and we hope that it's going to be a very informative session for each of you, that you're going to take something out of this that you can bring into your reporting as you continue within your investigations on critical minerals, on the energy transition in Africa, and how China is playing a role within that in the continent. And specifically to our speakers today, Dr. Wei Xin, who's joining us online. Welcome and thank you for being with us. We're also joined by Dr. Nelson Chipamakande. Sorry, let me say that again. Dr. Nelson, let me say that. Dr. Nelson Chipangamate. Yes, Dr. Nelson is joining us from the Wits Mining Institute. We really appreciate you being with us today and for your continuous support and guidance in terms of the content and information that can inform this program, as well as Mr. Ben Ira from Global Witness. Welcome and thank you for being with us. And then the rest of our speakers for the day will have Julia Evans from the Daily Maverick. We have Fidelis from China Dialogue, Eric Olander from the China Global South Project, as well as Justice Wanzala. Thank you, colleagues, and welcome. We look forward to your contributions. We'll also be having Dr. Lin Shi, I think she's in the room with us. Welcome and thank you. As well as Yunong Wu, Sherry Shan. Welcome. Thank you, colleagues. All right, so that's all from me. And I'll hand over to Mr. Tom Baxter. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bongoe. And thank you to you and to Thomas, the ACRP project and Wits University for hosting us here and helping make this happen. We're really appreciative of it. And likewise, we really enjoy working with you and hope to do so much more in the future. I'd give a brief introduction to China Dialogue Trust. I think many of you know us already. We're an independent, non-profit online media site, and we publish on environmental issues and climate, with a particular interest in China's involvement in issues around the world. But we've also grown a lot in the last 20 years and write on issues from many parts of the world. We publish in multiple languages with a belief that good quality reporting on climate change and environmental issues needs accessed by publics around the world. We hope that what we report can provide accurate, detailed, nuanced information to really form a bedrock for good quality, solid discussion around the world, whether that's with publics, whether that's with policymakers, academics, and so on. We count them all as part of our audience. I thought, one of the main reasons for hosting this session is that China Dialogue and ACRP are sponsoring 5 journalists with grants to report on critical minerals issues around Africa. And they're in the audience with us today, and you'll have a chance to interact with them today and particularly tomorrow morning. I wondered, the grantees here, do you want to just wave your hands so we know who you are? And congratulations. It's great to have you here. So, critical minerals, which is what we're here to discuss over the next 2 days, have become an issue of global importance. They're central to many of the new technologies emerging in our lives, whether that's mobile phones, electric vehicles, and perhaps of particular relevance to this workshop and the audience and participants here is the importance they hold in the energy transition around the world. That is, of course, both a transition away from fossil fuels and also about expanding energy access across the world to achieve 100% energy access and clean energy access. As a result, demand for these critical minerals is set to boom, and I really mean boom, and I'm sure we'll hear more about it today. One prediction from the IEA predicts that lithium, just one critical mineral central to batteries, demand for that could increase as much as 42 times over the next 2 decades. And it's similar with a lot of other minerals and metals that we're talking about here. For much of the Western world, critical minerals have become an area of strategic and geopolitical importance. In the eyes of those governments, China controls too much of the supply chain, posing a threat to energy transitions. This focus and tone is increasingly showing up in Western media coverage of critical minerals, but it is far from the only story. To a number of resource-rich countries in the global south, DRC, Chile, Indonesia, and elsewhere, critical minerals have become a potential source of economic growth, employment, and industrialization. Some have even likened critical minerals to the oil of the 21st century, and some have called for an OPEC-type organization to control their supply and prices. And yet, in many of these countries, mining and processing of these minerals has also proven to be a source of severe environmental damage, social inequalities and injustices, and sites of labor and other rights abuses. Mining can cause damage to precious landscapes. The supplementary infrastructure, such as roads, railways, power infrastructure, can cause further damage. They're often extremely energy intensive and can leave behind toxic byproducts. In addition, local communities often find themselves displaced or lacking in the supposed benefits of these projects. Globally, China plays a central role in net zero supply chains and therefore in critical minerals. Like countries in the West, it's transitioning its huge economy away from fossil fuels towards a net zero economy. And therefore it has massive demands for batteries, EVs, solar panels, and the likes. It's also the world's #1 manufacturer of net zero goods. In excess of 90% of solar PV panels are manufactured in China. And as a result, China's manufacturers are the main destination for critical minerals extracted from around the world. But China also plays an interesting dual role in this picture. On the one hand, yes, Chinese mining companies are heavily involved in the extraction of unprocessed critical minerals. But on the other hand, China has emerged as one of the main backers of infrastructure and industrial facilities in the global south. The emergence of the nickel production industry in Indonesia is perhaps one example of where Chinese companies played a role in industrialization in the global south. Recent years have also seen numerous MOUs signed with Chinese companies to bring critical minerals processing, as in not just extraction, but processing to African countries. Now, I'm only scratching the surface of this complex and consequential industry here. But what's clear to me is that the role of high-quality journalism in this space could not be more important. Governments and companies need to be held account. Policymakers require better quality information and discourses on critical minerals. And last but not least, publics around Africa and around the world require high-quality, accurate, factual, and accessible information on this emerging industry of huge importance to all our futures. So you don't need to hear any more from me. I'm pleased to say that we have a wide range of experts in the room with us over the next 2 days, and they're going to be sharing their knowledge and experiences related to mining, the environment, social justice, and more. Over these next 2 days, we'll be lucky enough to learn from them and engage in discussion with them. Today, which is the first day of the workshop, we will learn some of the fundamentals about critical minerals and then focus on reporting and investigation skills. Tomorrow, which will be a closed-doors session, so to folks online, tomorrow is only for the people in the room here. We'll take a much deeper dive on some of the thorny issues surrounding critical minerals and really engage with discussion on each other. Before closing up, I'd like to emphasize that while many of the sessions we're going to host today will involve speakers sitting up here at the front, the workshops are designed to be interactive and discursive. Speakers and non-speakers, we have a diverse range of experiences on these issues, and I truly believe that we have much to learn from each other. And I hope that this workshop can contribute something to that process. So thank you very much, everyone. And without further ado, I'm going to hand over to our first speaker, Nima, who's a China-Africa analyst with decades of experience and Francophone editor with the China Global South Project. Thank you very much.
Morning to you all. I'm going to try not to start with the questions because someone told me the first two presentations you've done at AIJC and the one you did here, we started with a question to the audience. So I'm not going to do that. So I'm not going to try to break the ice. We are already not tired, so we are all fine for this session in the morning. I'm going to do some housekeeping announcement. First of all, I'd like to have a volunteer who's going to time me to make sure that I stay in the 30 minutes. That's good, because I want really to stay on the time, so we have much more time for discussion. Second of all, I think some of you have already got at the door the practical guide for African journalists on reporting on cobalt issues. It was a reporting guide that we've produced at the China Global South relating the cobalt industry in the DRC. I'm going to dwell much more on that later at the end of the presentation. But if you haven't, but you're interested, we have them both in French and English. You're going to have them there at the beginning, at the door over there. Last one, I have the tendency sometimes to speak to a faster pace. So if I do, please, can you just raise your hand and say, please, can you slow a bit so we can have a much good conversation on that issue. So Tom has given me the burden to be the kind of keynote speaker to begin this conversation on this very difficult and quite interesting topic of critical minerals in Africa. I love it at all. I love it really very much. I cover it on a daily basis on different issues, on different countries, on different aspects, the geopolitics of it, and it's really interesting. So, without further ado, let's dive into the presentation. So, we're going to go on critical minerals in Africa. So, what do we have here? We have here a kind of cheat sheet on different critical minerals in Africa to allow you to kind of see and understand what do we have there. We have minerals that intervene in the processing, in the fabrication and manufacturing of EV batteries. In some time, when you talk about those critical minerals, it's always important to know where Africa stands, in what level. Most of the time when we have that debate, we tend to always talk about the DRC because, you know, you have cobalt, and cobalt is the main product when you talk about batteries, and even there, it depends on the kind of battery that you talk about. But we do have a wide range of critical minerals that intervene in the processing of EV batteries. We have cobalt, where here we're going to see the important, we don't have a big screen here, but you can see on different screen there which countries are in Africa are important on that part. When you look at cobalt, of course, you have DRC, as I already mentioned. You have copper, the top three, then the top four, you have Chile, Peru, China, you also have DRC inside. When you go to graphite, one of the minerals that China has imposed a ban on it most recently. You have China, you have also Mozambique, you have Madagascar. I don't know if any of you has ever thought Madagascar is a country with critical minerals. Most of the time, it never popped up. If I ask you, you're going to tell me DRC, Zambia, Namibia, Zimbabwe with lithium. But beyond that, nobody would think, for example, of Ghana in terms of bauxite, or even Guinea in terms of iron. We also have iridium, South Africa. South Africa is a very rich country. We don't talk about it most of the time, but it's a very much rich country. You have South Africa, you have Zimbabwe. And when you go to manganese, who can give me, without even reading, a country with manganese in Africa? I know you've already seen that, but who would have thought of Gabon as a country producing manganese and being a very important actors in that space? You have South Africa, Gabon. And you also have, I didn't circle nickel here because it's still on, it's not on real on phases, but you have nickel where you have, when it comes to critical minerals, when it comes to mining in general, producing countries have the tendency to always, I would say, conflate and show how much, they have the huge potential. And one of those countries, the DRC, my country, and recently they say we are working on finding one of the biggest nickel, reserve in Africa and in the world. So we're gonna have to see what's going to happen there. We also have, of course, lithium. I didn't mention that, but in the list here we have where we have Zimbabwe, who is really a very big actor in that space. We also have country like Mali, where we have that presence as well. Platinum, of course, again, South Africa, Zimbabwe. Those are the important countries when it comes to producing critical minerals in Africa. Who are those important countries where to look at? On the second graph now, you have the Chinese presence in that space in Africa. And this is, it's China beyond the critical minerals, it's China in mining industry in general in Africa. This is the map in 2021. And you see China has been quite present in the various countries. And they're present in certain countries, they are much more powerful, much more present in other countries. And one of the countries that we know where they're more present in DRC, where they produce, let's say, the main producers of cobalt and coppers in DRC, 73% of them are Chinese. And they produce around 75 to 80% of the country's output of cobalt and copper. It's just to tell you how much important they are there. But they're also present in countries like Zambia, of course. I mean, we now see them bridging to country like Zimbabwe for lithium, going down to Namibia. We also see them going to Tanzania in terms of prospection, in terms of exploration. And when we talk about that, we tend to because the data most of the time doesn't cover the exploration permits, which means that those permits that are not reached the level of exploitation and operation yet. So we really don't know. So we have to expect that in the next 5 to 10 years, when those exploration permits would be really becoming operation permits, where we're going to see how much China has grown its presence in that space in Africa. And that's really something we're going to have to look at closely when we report on those issues, how much China is an important actor in that space. And we are the main Chinese company, not the main, but the big names on that space. We have China Molybdenum, we have Zijin Mining with different operations across Africa, in DRC, in Zambia, in South Africa. We have Gangfang Lithium in Mali. We have Baowu Steel that you find in Cameroon. You find Baowu Steel as well in Guinea. And you also find different Tsingshan, for example, Tsingshan Holding. Who's Zimbabwean here? Do we have Zimbabwe? Do you know Tsingshan, right? How they're really operating in country, they're really expanding with the Dyson. They're planning to build a huge mining industrial complex in the country. We have Hwayo Cobalt, Zhejiang Hwayo Cobalt, present in DRC, Zambia, also now branching into Zimbabwe. We have CNMC, state-owned companies. We have Sanohydro. We have all those companies. And the big trend that you're going to notice, like the leading companies when it comes to critical minerals in that space in Africa are state-owned companies, because they do serve, as much as their companies, wanting wanting to maximize profits, they're also strategically driven into securing those critical minerals. So it means that they're in a position where they can still move into markets where they're not making money, because them securing those critical minerals has much more importance for the countries, for China, than making money. This aspect gives them a very important advantage over many Western countries, because Western companies most of them are privately owned, so they are profit driven. How are you going to convince your board that you're going to a country where the price of cobalt is tanked, the price of copper is tanked, and the space is very politically unstable, but you need to go there? You cannot do that. Chinese companies, they have the luxury and they have that ability to do that. That's allowed them to be still present in that sector. That's why it's going to be much more difficult for many Western companies to be competing with the Chinese in that space. I'm going to come back to that later. And where China is really having a lead on that space, I'm not going to go through the numbers, but you're going to see them there. 80 to 85% entire production of copper production in DRC, 65 to 75% refined in China, cobalt refined in China. China is increasing its control of Zimbabwe and Mali lithium mine. I wish I had put that map of Zimbabwe here. There was a map that was released a few weeks ago by the Zimbabwean Association of Mining Industry, I think, that shows you the impact and how Chinese companies are really present as the main actors in the mining industry in Zimbabwe. And I'm going to put a bit of stop on Zimbabwe's case just to show you the geopolitical aspects on how geopolitical impacts how Chinese are becoming more present in Zimbabwe. When you have economic sanction on a country, you impose Western sanction on a country, basically by those sanctions, they just created a space where there was no Western company who could have come into the country because their reputational damage, all the risks that comes with that. So when you do that, who are the countries going to have to come? China, because China doesn't care about what you think about them. They don't, they have that ability to be in the country. So China building lithium processing in Nigeria, bauxite processing in Ghana, increasing control of the logistic of critical minerals in terms of railway, transport, roads, and everything. And China aims to fully partially own vertical within the supply chain, mining, processing, logistic, railway infrastructure. So they kind of try to be present on every segment of the supply chain, because it's very much important for them. Because when you see how it has become a very sensitive and geopolitical issue, as a country, you tend to want to be present in different segments to make sure that you're not vulnerable toward another country. So this is just a summary of what I've already shown there, different statistics. I'm going to share the PowerPoints later, so if you want them, you can have them. So the China in critical minor logistics, and you have that where CITIC and Shandong won 20 years of concession on the Lobito ports, North Corridor, not the Benguela Railway. I want to make an emphasis on that. And you have companies, when you talking about the Lobito corridor, who knows which company has won the concession on the Lobito corridor? Who's following that at least? Come on, we have journalists who have received grants to cover those issues. You cannot receive a grant and not at least at this point cover that part. Who has an answer? Come on, guys. You had an answer? Yes. Traffic Europe made a consortium with two other companies. Among them, you have a Belgium company and you have a Portuguese company. Interesting company, Motengil. And Motengil, 30% of Motengil is owned by a Chinese company. But even there, when they don't win the concession, because they wanted to have the concession on that corridor, they still manage to be present on that segment. You have China Gejoba Group completed the project to restore 107 kilometers of line between Walvis Bay and Arandis in Namibia. Jerry International signing a 363 million on dry port in DRC. That was already completed. You have increasing Chinese truck presence in that segment of transport between DRC, Zambia, and Durban and different ports. We see more and more Chinese companies being present there. And you have Zhejiang Communication Construction and China Railway signing a $60 million contract with Zambia to rehabilitate 327 kilometers of double I-trackway between Lusaka and Ndola. It's a private-public partnership for 25 years. So you see the map there where you see Chinese presence kind of spreading I didn't even mention the ports where they're getting presence here and there. And, So what's the new challenge that's, despite its, a heavy and strong presence on the continent, China still has to face new challenges. Those challenges that you do have now, the biggest one would be the demand for local processing and transformation. You have an increasing number of producing countries that are saying, there's no way we are missing the energy transition. We've missed other opportunities, but there's no way we're gonna miss this one. So this is one of the major challenges that China has to face. I'm gonna explain to you why it's the challenge. What other challenge they have to face? This is a quite common challenge they see every day. Governance and political stability risk when it comes to mining industry. They do business in a country like, let's face it, they're not the nice kids when it comes to transparency, democracy, governance. Chinese companies just have the ability to adapt in those environments. It doesn't mean that they like corruption. It just means that they have much more flexibility because they don't have boards to respond to. They don't have a public opinion to criticize them. So that kind of manage, they're able to be in those space. And you also have the ongoing discussion with different countries on how to respond to the demand that those countries are asking now. How do we do that? How do we face the challenge that we have to overcome for us to build those processing on the ground? And the biggest challenge will be the geopolitical challenge now, where you have US and American initiatives taking forms in a way that how they're going to reduce as much as possible the dependence on China when it comes to critical mineral supply chain, because they have noticed at that point that they are pretty much depending on China all throughout. So they're trying to put now initiatives to say, how are we going to build our own supply chain, or the kind of supply chain that's really reduce our reliance on China in that space. And you have so many initiatives now, at some point it's just difficult to keep track of them. You have the MESP, Minor Security Partnership, launched in June 2022. You have the IRA, Inflation Reduction Act, which is not really aimed to critical minerals, but which has a strong component of critical minerals in terms of access of access in the US market. You have the PGII. Just quick question, who can give me the PGII? What does it mean? Guys, come on. I don't want to make Tom feel bad. When you covered, PGII, who can give me what does it mean? Really? No one? Okay. I'm going to come back to that then. You have the different trilateral MOUs signed with different African countries. You have the EU Global Gateway. I don't want even to ask a question there because you're all going to look at me as if I'm interrogating you. We have the Critical Minerals Act passed by the EU, putting cobalt and copper and all different other minerals in that space. And we have other trilateral MOUs signed with the US, with Zambia, with DRC. All those initiatives are coming to a part where they're trying now to build their own supply chain in that space. So, what's Africa demands and challenge? Yes, what's Africa demand and challenge? As I said, the most important demand now is on the top of the list is development of local value chain. We are just tired of exporting raw critical minerals. We want a value chain. We want to move up to the value chain, even though we need to kind of define how higher up we want to be and what does it mean, what does it involve, and how much it's going to cost us. We have to understand that. And this is where comes the challenge of it. Because we have a very poor and weak infrastructure when it comes to industrial environment. We don't have enough electricity. We have to address those issues. How do we address those issues when it comes to to that situation? How do we find electricity? Zimbabwe's huge project, but still fighting to supply electricity. They're looking at Mozambique. Maybe they're going to get electricity from Mozambique. You have economic ability to sustain strong and viable processing industry. Most of the time, we tend to forget that China got to that position with a very high financial high cost. A lot of mining processing in China are subsidized by the government. We're talking about billions of dollars a year. So the question is, how many African countries have deep pockets to really get up to ground those industry? Because that's going to be required. It's very important to keep that in mind. It won't just be enough to say, we're going to ask Zhejiang Cryo Cobalt or CMOC or CNMC to come and build. No, it's going to take subsidies to be able to keep those industry up to ground. How are we going to do that? Environmental legislation regulations. Most of the time, we tend also to forget that China has done that at a very great high cost on the environment. So the question is, how are the regulation and environmental laws right now in many African countries? Are we ready? Do we have the legal landscape to be able to accommodate those processing industry? We should not just be saying we want them right here, right now. We should be looking forward and say, how do we do that? How do we prepare? How are we ready to create the environment for it to happen? Because we have the case of Indonesia. Indonesia is doing great in terms of bauxite, nickel. But when you read the reports in terms of impact on the environment, you do see how it's really damaging to environment. This is where we have that opportunities of being behind and learning from those countries who move forward to know what change we need to make, what difference we need to make so we get the best deal in that context. Downstream markets, when sometime I talk with different mining companies, they say, we'd like to do processing on the ground, but let's face it, you don't have the market for that. You want us to refine lithium to what level, to do what? When you hear different mining ministers in Africa now, you say, no, we're going to build EV batteries in the next 5 years. Do you know how long does it take? Do you know the different processes that we have to go through? Most of the time, we also forget that within the supply chain or the value chain of EV batteries, we do have small supply chain of small components. That even there, we're going to have to be able to be present. That takes money, that takes time, that takes a lot of things. And most of the time, we tend to forget that. And the know-how, do you have the personnel, the people with the required qualification? We have a mining professor here. I'm much sure he's going to tell us, yes, we have the people for that. And I do hope we have enough of them and lots of them in those space in Africa to be able to pull that out. EU and Europe and US initiative, as I mentioned before, Mineral Security Partnership, an initiative led by the US, as I just quote from the official statement, to accelerate the development and diverse and sustainable critical mineral supply chain through working with host government and industry to facilitate targeted financial and diplomatic support for strategic projects along the value chain. This here explains, for example, the case of the trilateral agreement between the DRC, Zambia, and the US that was signed last December during the US-Africa Summit. It's in that space. US Inflation Reduction Act, where there is a series of measures that has an impact on the supply chain of critical minerals and to kind of ban Chinese products to get into the market. But China is getting smarter on that. I didn't mention on the presentation, but I'm going to talk about it here. China now has found a way to go through a country that has free trade agreement with the US to build processing plants there, to make EV batteries there, so to allow them to import them to the US. So that's why, for example, South Korea is very much reluctant onto banning China's money when it comes to lithium processing in South Korea. They've partnered, LGHM has partnered with a Chinese company to open an EV battery in Morocco. Morocco has a free trade agreement with Europe and the US, allowing them to, to bypass. It doesn't come straight from China, it comes from South Korea, Morocco, and the US. And when you look at that, it's kind of difficult for the US to compete against it because they kind of beat them on their own game and their own rules. And it's kind of playing smart though. So yes, US, as I mentioned, you have the US trilateral MOU, the MOU with Zambia and DRC to develop local value chain and critical minerals. I don't know how we are with that one. I'm not going to be talking much about that, but we are still at the level of talking and talking. We need to move forward into making what's going to happen. EU Global Gateway. Here, the European Union has done the same with Zambia and DRC. And here we have a huge chunk of money, not only for those countries, but in the general for Global Gateway. We have $300 billion that the EU is ready to invest in the different segment of the supply chain to be able to compete with China, or at least to create its own initiative, its own supply chain, and the Global Gateway and the PGII. Have you found the PGII? What does it mean? Have you cheated now? It's fine. So, what is it? Okay, great. Eric, you said that we went from PGII to PGI, right? Yeah. Yes. Okay. So those are the kind of information you need to be updated about it, because it moves fast on everyday basis. If you don't follow them, you're going to be kind of lost into the mix. And when you look at different initiatives that are put in place, you do realize that they touch two main segments: access and logistic. Access is allowing them to find a way. How do we find our own mining partners in Zambia, in DRC? We have an American company, Cobalt, who's received $150 million in prospection of copper in Zambia. They're trying to really move forward with that. We have now the Lobito corridor with Trafigura that's trying to find the way how we are going to connect the Benguela Railway to connect with the portion of DRC and Zambia. But on the other side, you have also China, who's moving with the Tazara Railway, where you have China Railway that's this is that close to get the concession contract on that. So we're going to see a lot of movement happening in that segment, and that's going to be really interesting for journalists who are covering this topic to follow on the next 5 to 10 years. Challenges that those initiatives have to face, and the first one must be the biggest one: ability to convince the private sector to follow through. This is the problem that European and Western do have in that segment. How do you convince your privately owned companies, profit-driven entities, to come and invest in a very unstable, corrupted country? How do you do that? How do you tell them that we're going to create a political environment so you can come and put your money? You can put 3, 4, 5, 6 billion, and you're going to get a return on investment. This is the big challenge you're going to have to face. Political and economic environment conducive to the private sector. Related to the first one, we don't have that all the time. We don't always have that in many African countries. We're going to have to create that. They're going to have to find a way how to create that in those African countries, which means they're going to have a comprehensive approach, mix of politics and economy, to see how they're going to do that. How far I am, Tom? 5 minutes. Great. Perfect. So ability for this initiative to survive the change of power in the US and Europe. Let's face it, I'd say something might be controversial, but democracy is messy. Democracy is messy in a way that when you have a change of power, the one who comes into power can say, you know, guys, you're too keen into those projects. I'm not so keen into putting $300 billion in Africa. It doesn't make sense to me. And especially when you have Donald Trump, who might be coming back in the US, you kind of wonder what's going to happen to the PGI. If he comes with the same rhetoric that, quote unquote, some whole countries, you kind of have to expect that all those fuss and buzz around doing something with the PGI is going to be kind of tough to pull out for the US. So this is the kind of challenge they're going to have to face. Tip for journalists. in covering those issues. Knowledge of critical minerals and producing countries. You have to know them. Who are the main? When I say manganese in Africa, you have to be able to have that on top of your head. When I say cobalt, that's easy because, you know. When I say bauxite, when I say iron, you have to have two of those elements. Understanding the value chain of these minerals, it's very important. Sometimes it's too much technical that we tend to be able to we just kind of summarize it, supply chain. But you have to dig deep to kind of understand, as I was saying about the China knowledge, you have to be able to know them, to be able to challenge when a public official come and say, you know what, in 6 months, in 1 year, we're going to be able to build the EV batteries in here. You're going to say, no, based on this and that, we are far off. Understanding the supply chain of these minerals, understanding the geopolitics of those critical minerals, it's becoming a very important component. You have to understand the geopolitics. If you don't get that, you're just missing the point. Understanding the goals of these different stakeholders, what China wants, what Chinese company wants, what's the difference between a state-owned Chinese company and a private-owned company? Do they work together? What's the dynamic? What's the red lines? What's the limitation? What they cannot do or can do? What European can do and cannot do? And keeping an eye on the political agenda of African political leaders. You cannot just believe that one African president wants to do things just because of the love of the country. You also have to understand the internal political dynamic inside the country to understand why they're taking that direction when it comes to these minerals or to this partnership with XY country. Resources, as I was saying earlier, we have the China Global South Project has produced a very interesting map of DRC and the map of DRC cobalt and coppers. So it's available on our website in French and in English. You can see them. It's very great resources. You're gonna see where the Chinese mining are present, where the Kazakh mine are present, where the Indian mines are present, how much they're selling to who, it's going to where, and everything. And we also have, as I was saying, the reporting guide on cobalt in DRC. So if you're really interested on how to cover that topic, how to cover the issue of child labors in DRC, how, even there, I'm going to come back later on that, maybe if there is question in terms of the debates, child labors and the environment, how to address that. And there is also the very interesting tool that was republished by Resource Matters, which is a Belgian NGO that did a tremendous, great job on that. I'm going to put the link into this presentation. So those who want the presentation, you can access them directly. So yes, please stay in touch, and if you have any questions, comments, feel free to reach out to me. I can talk about those topics for days and days and days and days. I don't want to bore you much. That's all for me. I hope I stayed in those 30 minutes. Just thank you. And something else before finishing. To accompany the cobalt map that we've produced, we have the white paper on DRC, China's role in DRC cobalt supply chain, who's who. I have a very limited numbers here. Those who are really not just going to take it because they give you a conference, you're going to put it in your bag. But if you are really interested into reading, to understanding what the actors, what the players, I have few copies. The first ones to come, they can get some. If you're late, my friend, you're going to miss it. So, thank you very much, and I'm here for any question and comment.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much, Joe. I thought that was a fantastic introduction to the complexities of this issue that we're discussing. And I'm sure you have many questions. What we're going to do first, though, is we're going to hand over to Wei Shen, who's online. And he's going to give a presentation from, I think, a slightly different perspective. But again, I think demonstrating to you just how complex and how many different strands there are to this issue. Yes, so Dr. Wei Shen is a senior research fellow at the International Institute for Green Finance, which is part of the Central University of Finance and Economics in Beijing. He's also a senior researcher at the UK's Institute for Development Studies, and he's done some fantastic work on these topics, so I hope you enjoy the presentation.
Thank you for inviting me for this exciting event, and congratulations, Gerhard, for a wonderful opening presentation to talk about the complexities of this issue. I'm a political economist, and I was given this topic to talk about the political economy of critical minerals. And I just realized that to speak to a non-academic audience, whenever I talk about power, policy processes, institutional frameworks, terms like this, I will lose my audience immediately. So this time I will try to use human language to talk about, to making sense of, to some degree, to making sense of some of these complexities. And also I will talk less about China. I'm sorry. I know I'm as a UK-based Chinese researcher talking about critical minerals in Africa already, the fact is already leads to an identity crisis to me. But I'm a development researcher. I think it would be better for me to anchor my presentation and my arguments from the ground of development and context. So let me start. Critical minerals. First, I would like to say I don't like the term of critical minerals at all, because it seems to be suggested that these minerals are particularly critical because they are supporting energy transitions, like to produce solar panels, wind turbines, and EV batteries, and so on. So that they are more critical than others, right? And so there's a clear kind of a message there. This type of minerals are more important to other types of minerals, which I don't think is the case. But there are also terms like transitional minerals, which I also think is a little bit vague. I would try to use a kind of a more conventional or boring terms to call it green mining or sustainable mining, which I think include 4 pillars when we talk about what is green and sustainable mining. From theoretical perspective, I think there are 4 elements. First, these minerals, as I said, are extracted to support sustainable sectors rather than conventional sectors. That's the pillar we already talked about. The second pillar is that these mining or processing operations or capacities are supported by a sustainable and clean infrastructure systems, which is particularly lacking in developing countries. It is not just the energy system we're talking about, but it is about transportation system, ports, and so on. We try to, in an ideal world, these systems should be as clean, as sustainable as possible as well. And the third element of a green mining is that these activities are, causing minimum environmental or social inputs and impacts. And these 3 elements, are kind of a universal requirement. It doesn't matter how where the investment are going, and these should be kind of a criteria for us to evaluate whether this mining investment is sustainable or not. But there are this 4th pillar is a little bit different because it is quite developmental. It's like to ask whether these activities, whether these investments can actually boost the sustainable development in the recipient countries. In this case, developing countries, and also communities as well, towards a kind of a more sustainable way of developmental path. That requirement, obviously, is kind of unique to the global south. And why it is particularly relevant for critical minerals, as you can see, I think Johan just mentioned that different minerals, that we have different key countries that are supplying these minerals. Yes, but if you look at the map, the list, the majority of them are developing countries. The countries in green colors are basically mid-income countries, while the countries in yellow are largely least developed countries. And that's why the 4th pillar is particularly relevant for these countries. For these countries, obviously the rising price of rising value or tremendous value that of these critical minerals present opportunities, but also present challenges on how to manage this newly, how to realize this this new treasure and how to manage them properly. Using an inappropriate metaphor to compare the situation, it's more or less like lottery winners. They need to learn how to manage their newly awarded funding, right? But actually, according to research, 70% of the lottery winners end up broken, and some of them went bankrupt. So it's like, it's common phenomenon, and at national level we call it resource curse, which is phenomenon which I talk about later. But it's just show that the problems or the challenges we're talking about in the critical minerals are not necessarily a new problem. It is an old problem, right? It is a problem, it's quite prevalent, not at country level, organization or individual level as well. Another unique situation for these developing countries is that if you want to realize the treasure of these critical minerals, so you rely on foreign investments or investment or finance from foreign entities, which undoubtedly have kind of those people usually have different visions and priorities from the host government, from the host communities and host people. So how to reconcile these differences is another key concern. So besides these kind of national or strategic concerns about using this, realizing and using this newly kind of resource treasure properly, there are other concerns as well at the local level. And if you look at this map on the left, it shows that most of these minerals, critical minerals, are kind of are located in a high level of intersectionality with territories that are less impacted by industrialization process yet. So which means that these territories are mainly traditional rural areas or agricultural areas, and the communities are mainly consists of peasants and indigenous people. So taking Africa in the middle of this picture, of this map as an example, is that 50% of these resources bases are located very near to the lands of indigenous or peasant people. And in another 25%, that consists of both groups. So altogether, 80% of the areas are close to, are related to peasant or indigenous people in these local communities. So any new investment coming into these countries means that they have to engage with these people in issues like, in relation to the issues like land, food, water, jobs, and so on. So any of these issues, if mishandled, like we have seen in many areas, in many cases, probably in many decades, if not centuries, these problems will lead to not just the conflicts of struggles, but actually a failure outcomes for any kind of industrial or developmental strategies, excuse me, we mentioned above, right? So based on these two facts, green and sustainable mining in development context has to deal with these two set of challenges simultaneously. One is about national development strategy and the mechanisms to promoting green industrialization and economic catching up at the same time. But at the same time to look at about local community programs that can help investors to successfully adapting into local communities and also making positive impacts and changes at the local level. So national and local level are both important. So hence this kind of a dual challenges we face. So here is just a very simple illustration of, of different scenarios, broadly categorized in like a 4-quadrant diagram. So the worst scenario you need to prevent, obviously, for the recipient countries, the situation at the lower left corner, is that investments are not generating any national or local benefits, just benefits to investors alone, right? And on the contrary, the ideal, the perfect situation is that upper right corner, where investment produces both high national and local benefits that leads to a sustainable and just outcomes. But actually, in reality, there are, second best scenarios, possible second best choices. So more or less like, one of that kind of scenarios is on the upper left corner when the investments only produce, apart from profits, only produce national benefits. But those benefits are inefficiently or insufficiently redistributed to the local level. So I call it kind of a nationalist kind of mining approach. But on the contrary, there's another second best scenario is that, the mining activities only benefits local communities without considering its kind of a broader picture of the national strategy, industrialization, this type of concerns. So the investors only provide kind of CSR and community development programs. They're doing well locally, but they don't have any kind of national benefits to talk to. So it is a responsible mining by definition, but in the development context, it's not. It's still kind of a second best scenario. So for any project, I think Johan mentioned many projects already. We can broadly categorize them into these four scenarios and see, and then kind of give them a score to see what are the key issues for our analysis. But anyway, the thing is that only these four categories, I still think is not enough to understand the complexity of the issue. Because, devils are always in the detail. And so I try to be a little bit more concrete about national benefits and the local benefits associated with mining. Associated with green mining or sustainable mining. So when we talk about national interests or benefits, they can be different things. They can be monetary things like tax revenues and royalties collected and redistributed to other manufacturing sectors. This more is like indirect benefits, but they can also be technological and industrial capacities that enhanced and that leads to enhanced productivities. And they can be institutional capacity that we often talk about in the literature about pocket of efficiencies, like some particular industries or sectors are way more efficient than others, right? So that kind of institutional development could be another additional benefits generated from these mining activities that they create a kind of a more functioning institutional system or sectors compared to the rest of the bureaucratic systems. So all these are kind of a potential ones. There could be reputational. For example, climate change and also a kind of a global contribution to the combats of climate mitigation. This type of benefits can be, for the developing countries, is quite kind of a reputational as well. So all these are kind of a specific targets or goals or kind of benefits that the state can pursue. But at the local level, they also mean many different things. When we talk about jobs, employment, it's not just about number of additional jobs created by mining activities, but peripheral activities, commercial activities, transportation, local shops and restaurants and so on. But also about the jobs that are eliminated by the arrival of the investment, say, artisanal mining jobs and agriculture jobs and so on. So there are always such kind of trade-offs between the two. And also it's not just about the number of jobs, but also the quality of the jobs, working conditions, health, safety, all these type of things, and salary level and so on. So even for employment, there are many subcategories to talk about whether these local benefits are actually achieved. The environmental footprint is also, consists of many indicators: air, water, soil pollutions, and so on. At different stages of projects implementation, and also social, cultural impacts could be overlooked, but fundamental. If you think about arrival of industrial activities in the rural areas, that's kind of a fundamental transformation of the housing. Many areas, housing, belief system, power hierarchy at the local level, and so on, between the power relations between men and women, old and young, and chief and the people and so on. So all these are kind of the social impacts and the social transformations that we need to deal with. So in facing this kind of a very difficult, very complex situation, we need to understand several things. It's like, first, it's difficult to achieve the situation. It's pretty challenging, or if ever possible, to achieve an ideal situation that the national benefits and local benefits can be maximized at the same time. So there will be trade-offs when we consider which type of benefits are the most important ones at current stage, and which type of targets and goals should be maintained or as a priority. And we also, the decision makers, whoever the decision makers are, they need to understand that there will be trade-off between short-term goals, long-term goals, and medium-term goals for these mineral activities. And there needs to be a hierarchy among these benefits to be proposed, to be negotiated, and to reach consensus among major stakeholders. Right. Some goals that we talked about is mainly about establishing red lines, or establishing kind of a safeguard, kind of a bottom lines that nobody would like to transpass. It's like, the baseline scenario. But some other goals, it's like we don't want to put a ceiling on this. We don't want to put any limits on that. We just wanted it to go as high as possible. For example, knowledge transfer, skill transfer. We don't set limits on those targets. We want to achieve as high as possible. So they're about goals, that about ceilings. They're about goals about floors, right? So there will be co-benefits. For example, if you provide infrastructures that connecting to the mining site, they may produce co-benefits to the local communities. If we talk about energy supply, if we talk about a road, infrastructure like this will generate co-benefits. So their priorities should be reconsidered, and so on. So, but there will also be trade-offs. For example, if you the trade-offs between the most obvious trade-offs we talked about just now is like you want to achieve revenues, for example, at national level, and to maximize the revenues, but you also want to nurture an industry, kind of particularly domestic manufacturing capacities or industries or skills, which requires a long-term kind of an input or investment, which may jeopardize your immediate cash flow, right? So this kind of a trade-off between immediate cash flow and long-term kind of investment is also something you need to manage. So that's why besides co-benefits, you need to consider trade-offs as well. And also it's about implementation, right? All these beautiful plans, if not properly implemented, and they will went wrong, and almost inevitably things may went wrong from time to time, and the question is who are monitoring the process and who have the power to change the course if needed. So all these are the kind of challenges these kind of challenges come back to the questions of who are making the decisions, why are they making the decisions, how decisions are made, and for what purposes, for what priorities. And just to show that how difficult that priorities can be set up, or how to reach consensus on different priorities, I listed these 7 categories of co-benefits, of national and local benefits that can be generated from critical mining activities. Let's see if we can reach any consensus among this audience. We have quite a small audience today. You can just type in, different numbers that you think that are more important than others. We have 7 categories: industrialization, state revenue, climate benefits, climate mitigation, providing additional public goods and infrastructure for the mining sector. We have local employment, local jobs, We have, environmental footprints that need to be managed, and we have land, livelihood, and cultural, social impacts. Even based on these 7 categories, which ones? Let's give them 2. Let's select 2 as the most important ones that we need to consider. Let's see if you can reach the consensus. So if you're interested, you can type your priorities into the chat box. Let's see. But anyway, I think the difficulties as a political economist to think about the difficulties in reaching a kind of a consensus is like it's very difficult for any of us to basically put shoes to thinking of the scenario for others. It's like putting ourselves in others' shoes. For example, how we really understand the mentalities of central governments who are making the policies, or different set of policies that they need to develop. I think you need to understand that the government actors mainly look at all these complexities through the lens of power, right? It's about decision-making power, that they can make, appropriate policies timely and appropriately, and try to combine this policy as a proper policy mix. For example, you need investment policies to attract the FDIs. You need to, if you want to nurture domestic industrial capacities, you need the industrial policies, right? And also, you want to properly allocate taxation revenues, you need policies to support that as well. And all these kind of additional benefits on climate and so on, infrastructure and so on, you need planning and policies and for that as well. And the key thing, the challenge is like, do the decision makers, whatever level it is, have the power to synergize all these policies to make it the whole policy making system a coordinated one. You require a lot of power to do this. But it's not just about concentration of power. It is about power sharing as well. Sometimes you need a more concentrated, a more centralized power to coordinate all these policies. But at the same time, you need decentralizing some of your power system to sharing with those actors when you are clearly incapable of making right decisions. And particularly, for example, in the green industrial policies, a huge amount of studies shows that the more open the government is to discuss with for example, the sectors or organizations that the government would like to support, to listen to these organizations, the better the decision making would be, because the decision was made based on accurate and adequate information from the private sector. But the key, again, the challenge here is that the private sectors involved in critical mining sectors are foreign companies. How to establish this efficient communication system and trusty relations is quite challenging. But this type of embeddedness, like Roger once mentioned, is important. You have to embed your decision-making systems with the private sectors to support them. But at the same time, you also need discipline. Corruption is the often heard terms. Rent-seeking opportunities arise from these policy-making processes need to be controlled, which means that you need to support a sector, but you need to prevent corruption with them. So that's a pretty kind of a challenging one. So in order to reach the second goal of this triangulation discipline, you need an accountability system, which civil societies and journalists like you will play a very important part to check if the whole system is in right direction. All right. So embeddedness, discipline, and accountability. If these 3 pillars are upheld, you will have a better policy-making system that can achieve your national benefits we're talking about. Okay. Seen as an investor, I'm sorry about the time. I don't know how much time I still have. Try to speed up. Well, for any investors coming into a country like DRC, like Zimbabwe, like Zambia, to invest $1 billion, like Johar just mentioned, it's a quite risky business. It's a high risk, high gain game for any investors, not just Chinese investors. So business will look at all these complex issues we mentioned as kind of risks that they need to manage properly. Business hate uncertainties most, more than anything else. So all the policies we mentioned about investment policy, industrial policy, and taxation policy, climate policy, energy policies, they will look at energy mix in terms of how they present a kind of a risk or opportunities for them. The changing of the policies will be looked at as like a source of uncertainties. The changing of governments, like Johan also mentioned, it will be viewed as a source of uncertainties they have to manage. If they can't manage these uncertainties, they wouldn't come. Right? It's as simple as that. But there are different levels of uncertainties they're dealing with. So if you interview them, you understand that some uncertainties are more critical than others. Right? Some uncertainties are threatening the more or less like existential threat to the business. So, for example, the appropriation or national appropriation, the ownership requirement, also even the export ban. This more or less like this type of policies are more or less like a kind of existential threat to the investment. Then, as investors, they need to deal with it as an absolute priority. But there are other uncertainties that only leads to profitability revenues, or more or less like a monetary level or operational level. For example, downstream uncertainties, or for example, the power supply of the mining facilities. These are operational level or monetary level, which also very important, more or less like a secondary priorities for them. Right. So you have these two sets of priorities. Existential ones and also kind of operational ones. And the third level of uncertainties is related to the factors that are not yet threatening the survival of the business or the profitability of the business, but maybe in the future. So the security concerns, all the environmental and social criteria, impact assessment, this type of reputational risks. These are the risks that normally would not affect their operations and survival, but could be if not properly managed. So you can see that from the views of the investors, there are hierarchies. And that's why some of the concerns that we think are the most important ones are not really their priorities, understandably. But from the view of representatives at local interest or local level, what can be the priorities? That could be the most complex one, because there are highly diversified needs, and these demands in different communities are highly contextualized. In some areas, we come into these areas, we thought that they need energy most. No, they need water more than the energy access, because without water you can't live. And without energy, it seems that they cope it with fine. And some prefer roads than schools, some prefer hospitals than others, and so on. So there's no standard formula, and you need to have a kind of a demand-driven approach to really understand these localized demands, and these demands may change from time to time. So even within the same communities, people want different things. Men and women, they want different things. Old people and young people, they want different things. Powerful groups and vulnerable groups, they want different things. So it is very difficult. It's almost impossible for any investors to satisfy everybody's needs. But they need to do that. I mean, that's the challenging part. So the argument is that the investors can never do that alone. They have to find ways to work with local governments, work with social societies, civil groups, to find a proper strategy at a local level. But that, as I said, is not a priority by nature for any business organizations coming to investing in these areas. So that is quite kind of the most challenging part to me. It's like how to develop proper networks for these investors when they don't think it is a priority. They only see it when these lack of this type of networks, lack of this kind of event-driven community programs jeopardize their profit and their survival, which often is too late. So, well, I'll leave this open. I don't have an answer, but I just want to say that, okay, one of the potential is to identify co-benefits. As I said, for example, if energy access and energy supply to the mining side and to the communities are more or less like a coexisting problems that can be solved in one go, maybe providing electricity access, to the local communities and to the mining side, find a common solution would be a starting point for us to think about, building up a good neighborhood relations, but at the same time resolving a kind of operational challenge of the mining investment. There are other co-benefits as well that can be explored. As I said, these are mainly contextual, that varied from time to time, from one place to another. But this kind of a mentality, let's find some co-benefits and let's put these co-benefits as a priority, would be a workable way at local level. All right. But my argument is that all these problems we're talking about are not new problems. These are typical problems that we're facing. So I don't want to frame it as a new problem or a China problem or whatever problem. It is just has been there for a long time. If you look at the resource curse literature that being emerged 30 years ago, right? So, but the thing is that we don't have a clear answer of what caused resource curse. We have different explanations. Political scientists, economists providing different explanations. Political scientists talk about corruption and also a kind of a political concentration of certain sectors that are not relevant to taxpayers, and then the government are not really listening to the citizens because they don't have to. This kind of a political explanation. There are economic explanation as well. It's very similar. Is that the financial, so-called Dutch disease problem is that when the financial resources were overwhelmingly concentrated in one sector and overlooked other sectors to develop, which are needed as this kind of for decent-sized economy. You need a more balanced industrial base. So there are economic and political explanations. To me, I think the failure is probably the both, but the general, my understanding is that is the failure to establish a resource industrial linkages. If you think about mining, the role of mining to the British Empire, the role of mining to industrialization in Canada, the role of mining in countries like Australia, there is a clear evidence that such type of linkages between resource industry is crucial. I understand that many people talk about vertical integration and the vertical kind of a value added that African countries want to move up in the production chain or value chain along this EV or whatever green industries. I understand, but don't overlook the horizontal linkages, which could be more important. I don't know. I don't have any research on these areas. I'll be very keen to learn, to study on these issues. But I think, at least based on our literature on the developed countries, the resource industrial linkages, these horizontal ones, are more important than the vertical ones. But again, that's open to discussion. But as I said, if you think about China's rise and China's usages of its coal and other fossil fuel resources, is also like some provinces providing these resources, but established very close linkages with the industrial activities in the eastern coast provinces, and such linkages is the guarantee of development, right? Okay, but examining from the past, I think it's not sufficient. We also need to kind of have some imagination game to understand, to see if we want a not perfect solution, but ideal solution, say in 10 years away, whether African is producing, a battery level minerals or batteries is part of the future, or are we imagining something more concrete or more feasible? I think there are 4 elements, to guarantee that we reach a the upper right position. Is that we need institutions at the local level and the central level. It's not going to be. It's not necessary to be a perfect one. There will be corruption. There will be inefficiencies. They're functioning institutions at the central and local level. And you need advocacy networks and accountability mechanisms. I think Johan mentioned that in the environmental areas, many African countries need to improve that, but also, in other areas as well. Considering linkages, not just, vertical ones, as I said, the horizontal ones, to have this mineral infrastructure and industrial linkages. How infrastructures are supporting minerals and how minerals resources are supporting any manufacturing facilities that can enhance the productivity overall. But after all, productivity is based on skills and knowledge. So the enhancement of knowledge and skills is the basis of enhancement of productivity. Then the question is how much learning or how effective learning system can be established around this complex industrial mineral complex and around these investment activities. Ideally, local people can benefit most from these new learning systems because they pay a price. But it's more or less like a balancing. For example, when I'm visiting this mining site in Zimbabwe, I noticed that they employed 2,000 people. Local people, most of them from local villages, 50% of them at least from local villages. But the managerial positions are recruited in the capital city, in the top universities, in the financial sector, in the legal sector. These are the elite job, right? In the managerial sector. So it's about how to develop a kind of a proper learning system, even within these organizations. And also, it's about how the rest of the communities can benefit from it. And because, during this transformation from the local areas, basically agriculture area, as I said, the salaries of these mining workers are 7 times higher than the local average. 7 times higher than the local average salary. Is it a good thing or is it a bad thing? How such impacts are to be managed properly? It's beyond any individual investors. But it needs kind of understanding of the changing element of the society as a whole. We're changing our agricultural community into a mining town, and how to manage that transition properly, and could be a most important issue for us. Anyway, I'll just stop here and thank you very much, and I wish you really a very successful discussion for the rest of the day and tomorrow. Thanks again for inviting me. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Dr. Oesha. That was really fascinating and very rich. I hope, if it's okay with you, I'd really like to share your slides with everyone, because I think there was so much information in there. And as I think other people in the room will feel similar, as a journalist, there was about 100 different points in there that deserve digging into deeper to pull out stories. And I can tell you that I know some of the grantees in this room are planning to do stories that touch on some of the things you mentioned, including thinking through the so-called resource curse and what does that mean going forward, or looking at some of those co-benefits and the trade-offs between those different areas you shared. And as well, going back to Jero's presentation, we have plenty of stories looking at this whole idea of moving up the value chain and bringing more value into African economies. We're slightly over time, but I think we should take a few questions. Maybe we'll have like 5 minutes or so for questions for both of the participants. Yeah, does anyone want to go ahead? And do we have roving mics?
This is to you, Nema. With this huge amounts of money being cited and immense opportunities for the investors, we've got another component in Africa, the artisanal miners. When the governments are talking about this, negotiating with the investors, where do we place them? Because they also play a key role, and their products end up in outside markets, rarely processed local.
Excuse me, you mean artisan?
Artisanal miners.
Artisanal miners. I think I'm going to get in trouble answering that question because I have a slightly different view on the question about artisanal mining in that space. Because we are talking about heavy industry, heavy minerals. We're not talking about things like gold. That's in terms of presence of artisanal mining there, you don't have the same necessity of huge financial inputs to, to launch a gold operation or something like cassiterite or coltan, those kind of minerals. If we talk about those heavily processing minerals like cobalt, copper, lithium, and everything, my point has always been there's no future in artisanal mining. And as I say, I'm going to get criticism about that, but when government of producing countries in Africa are moving forward with the agenda of artisanal mining, for me, it's just a sense of laziness into there's no clarity in terms of what's the future of the mining policy that we do have. I'm going to give you an example. What's the point of having people doing lithium processing, artisanal lithium in your country when you do know that at some point it's going to need to be processed, transformed, and get much more value chain? Because if they want really to be useful, you're going to have to integrate machineries, equipment, and everything. Once you do that, you're not artisanal anymore. You are becoming semi-industrial, you're becoming industrial mining processes. So, but when we do encourage artisanal mining right now, we say we are going to, give them a framework, we're going to give them a place in a space. The question is what you do in 10 years, in 15 years. The problem is when we do that, it's just because we just don't know. We didn't find the solution how we are going to take all those communities to integrate them into the forward linkages. I'm going to use simple word. We didn't find a way to integrate them in the space where mining industry is creating jobs, is creating wealth for other people. So since we don't know how to do that, we say, okay, we're going to give you a space where you're going to be doing that. But the question is, if someone can tell me an example where he knows an artisanal mine that became industrial and those people became rich? And most of you can name me countries where an artisanal mine has been artisanal for 20 years. That's not the future of mining. And this is, for me, in that space there, personally, I don't think we should encourage artisanal mining. That's just a sign to say that the government needs to improve and put in place a better mining policy overall.
Thanks. I just want to give, I was just going to give space for you, Wei Shen. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, thank you. And I largely agree with Gerard that in the long run, I don't see a bright future for artisanal mining as well. But we're talking about not just about the future of this sector, but also about the future of those people who are involved in this sector at the moment. Is there any kind of a long-term planning for these people as well? That two set of thinking need to be, that's typically just a transition question. And I don't have answer for that. But I just use the example of how China tried to curb the small coal mining problems in Shanxi province as an example. They have a long-term plan. Say, well, each year we will reduce 20% of these capacities. This more or less like a very hardline policies. But at the same time, we don't want any trouble. I know people will lose their jobs, and they will be properly managed at the local level because the government don't want anyone social unrest. They can be annexed or allocated into larger mines, industrial mines. These workers, they can be provided with some securities, social securities, additional benefits, or depending on the local demands. I think one typical research is about how to regarding the schooling of their children. They can provide some special programs for their children to get education, which is a way more important issue for those middle-aged minors regarding monetary compensation compared to monetary compensation. There will be ways that you have to deal with the people well before we talk about a proper phasing out strategy in the long run.
Thank you very much. Is there one more question maybe before we go to break?
Hi everyone, my name is Nkateko Mabasa. I'm a freelance journalist, currently freelancing with Al Jazeera. Thank you for the presentation. I learned quite a lot. I have 2 questions for each speaker, and I'm going to keep it short. To Gerard, I think that's how you pronounce it. I'd written my question down. You spoke about the importance of political stability on the African continent. Which African countries can you say are ahead in that, in terms of achieving political stability and safe transitions of power? And what can other African countries learn from that, or rather, what do we need to do to get to that place of political stability in the country, such that it does not interfere with the just energy transition and also extraction of minerals? My other question is for Dr. Wei. How important is copper in the energy transition, and do we have enough copper globally, and will the energy transition and the need for copper not lead to some sort of a copper war? Thank you.
In terms of political stability, we have few countries that reached that certain level of political stability. We are in one of them. It can be disputed, of course, by many people, but South Africa is a country the way we have political stability. There's any kind of other issue, we can name corruption, bad governance, but you do have political stability. What I mean by political stability, it's an environment where you do know that when there is the next election cycle, there won't be violence. That the next election cycle won't put you in a limbo where you don't know what's going to come out of it. That's what we mean by political stability. It also means that even when there is a change of power, you have enough strong institutions to keep on maintaining the agreement that was signed before, and also keep on maintaining the institutions in place. And this is one of the many issues when it comes to mining industry in Africa in general. Dr. Wei has mentioned several factors. There's one factor I like to mention a lot when we talk about resource curse, is institutional curses. Many African countries are still failing to put in place the economic and political institution required to foster development through mining industry. We are kind of an hybrid system where the relationship that we do have to natural resources doesn't match the relationship that we do have on managing of power and all of that. So we find ourselves that natural resources, most of the time in many countries, are just used for political gain and to reach some. Some countries really have to put strong institutions in places, regulation, to be able to see how and what role the mining industry is going to play in our development not in 5 years, in 30 years, in 40 years. As long as we are not able to do that, we won't be able to move forward. And that, I think, that's one of the biggest challenge. Before even talking about mining, we need to find the right set of political and economic institutions that are going to foster development through mining industry, if we want to use mining as tool of development.
Regarding copper, I'm not an expert on copper in specific, I understand that copper has been important all the time. I mean, and if you think about the wires and the cables we're using, and also the usages in vehicles and transportation systems, you know, the demand will be rising. You know, I would not be surprised that there will be a sharp rise of demand. In terms of supply, I think Zambia is the largest supplier in Africa, but the largest supplier globally. I think is in Latin American countries, plus China, and so I'm not sure about a war on cocoa. How to define a war, but competition will be there. I think Jihad also mentioned many initiatives. I can't remember all these names. I'm quite impressed by Jihad's understanding of these initiatives proposed by the West. I think there will be new to compete, but I'm not see a kind of an open conflict, so kind of a war type of conflicts among different suppliers in the near future.
I'm just going to add one thing on that part. The demand of copper is going to increase, it keeps on increasing, and we should expect that since copper is becoming more and more important in EV industry and all other transition and in energy transition. But one of the main key when it comes to natural resources is always finding new deposits and new reserve and new project. And this is one of the part of the mining industry overall that it's sometimes underfunded because it depends on market fluctuation. When the prices are low, mining companies and funding institutions are really not keen into investing in greenfield project where we need to find new project. But with increasing demand, when the price goes high, you should expect in the coming years that people are going to invest more to finding new deposit, and to other minerals, copper is quite common. And I'm going to talk with under the surveillance of a mining professor. He is going to complete on that. But yes, copper is quite common that you can now find, but we just need to find new deposits, and hopefully we can meet the demand that we are hoping to have by 2027, which is around 29.8 million tons of copper per year. So we're going to see how it's going to move on that space.
Thanks. I think we have one question online, which, Bongoe, are you going to read that out for us?
Thanks, Tom. The question is for Dr. Shen, and it's: how do you see the evolving dynamics of international cooperation and competition, especially between China and African nations, in addressing the challenges of responsible and sustainable mining practices for critical minerals, considering the increasing importance of these minerals in the global energy transition? That question is from Mogi Mash.
Very comprehensive question. I think critical minerals has been listed as one of the priority areas for China-Africa cooperation in several documentations already. I think there's a joint declaration during the FOCAP meeting, a conference last year. And also, Jihad also mentioned that Chinese SOEs are very active in this area as well. But private companies like Ohio, like Xinjiang, are also very active in these sectors. In terms of cooperation, I think to me, I think that the question is very similar to when we talk about the cooperation between West and Africa on this issue. It's like, beside these diplomatic documentations, what on earth is happening on the ground, and what type of collaboration is needed. I think on reality, many Chinese companies are investing, with Western companies as a minor kind of equity investors at the beginning, and then gradually spending and kind of expanding their practices and investment. This is particularly for new kind of commerce in the areas. So it is not just about cooperation with the African partners, but also with Western companies as well. I think that's the reality, and it's not just particularly boosted by any diplomatic declaration. It's just like some Chinese companies are not comfortable about their understanding of the local markets or local partners and so on. They're relying on external partners to help with them, and at least at the initial stage. So such type of cooperation will exist for a long time, but Chinese SOE companies are very different because they're strong kind of a power, influence in other infrastructure sectors. They can advance. I think Gerhard also already mentioned that they can advance their existing capacities in other infrastructure sectors into the mining sectors. For example, DRC, they have been proposing these kind of mineral for infrastructure projects for a long time. Of course, the implementation problems is another issue. So that's their kind of advantages. So for SOEs and private companies, they have different cooperation strategies with local and Western partners in this area as well.
Thanks very much. I think another reminder on how important it is for journalists to dig into the granularities of like every deal for every project to really work out what's going on. And thank you very much to both Zhou and Dr. Shenwei. Thanks for calling in online. It's been a really fascinating topic. I found it fascinating, and I thought some of those questions are really interesting as well. We will have a chance to dig into these issues more in other sessions. For now, we're going to take a break until, I think, 11:45, and then we'll come back for a session talking more about critical minerals. What exactly are they? What is mining critical minerals? What is processing critical minerals? So yeah, enjoy the break. Gerald's here if you need to ask him more questions. There's loads of other people in the room to chat to and meet. So yeah, see you back in half an hour.